Hey guys, thought I'd make a little video here showing the making process behind my cultist rabbit mask. I got so much positive feedback from people online, so I'm very flattered. Thank you guys. Some of you have shown an interest in me taking commissions, which I'd love to start doing. I just want to make the mask and ears out of something a little more sturdy, like resin. I'd feel a lot happier with the quality that way, so I'll let you know when I start with that. Now, as I was on a time limit, I wasn't able to film much, so here's a little slideshow with narration instead. If any of you guys decide to have a crack at this method yourselves, I'd love to see what you come up with. Enjoy! For this project, I knew I wanted to try some form of paper mache, so I stumbled across paper clay, which I learned a lot about from Jonni at Ultimate Paper Mache on YouTube. I'll link her in the description. In my research, I found a video of somebody making a paper clay rabbit themselves, which I found super inspiring. I'll link that too if you guys want to check that out. I was sold on the idea of making a hair mask, so, like any project, I started out with a sketch. I knew I wanted the ears to be super big, as they are on the real animal, but other than that, at this stage there wasn't much of a design plan, so I was just gonna see where the thing would take me. The first thing I did was make resin eyes. I was pretty confident I liked the idea of just plain white eyes, as they would boost the creepy vibe. I already had resin on hand from uni, but I bought one of those little paint palettes with the little dishes to create them. Another challenge I had to overcome was the sculpting phase. Normally I would make this out of some type of clay, but my monster clay is currently being used for another mask project that's in the works, so I had to get creative. I dove into the recycling and pulled out papers and cardboard boxes that were used for the majority of the armature. The mask was originally going to have a flat edge all the way around, but I didn't like how that looked, so I added shapes to make it more organic looking, and a place for the ears to sit later. When I was happy with the base, I attempted to add details with tinfoil, but I realised the armature wasn't rigid enough for me to push against, so I spent a little longer bulking up the inside with cardboard. Once that was all good, I could then get onto the detail work. I didn't want to use up all of my tinfoil, so in places where the details were thick, like the eyebrows and cheeks, I scrunched up magazine paper to fill out most of the shape and added foil over the top. If anything was uneven, I would add little bits of cardboard to bulk places up and then add more foil where needed. Once I was happy with how things were looking, I fashioned a nose out of cardboard to see how that would look, but decided it just kinda looked like a generic animal and not like a hare or a rabbit, so I scrapped that and tried again. At this point, I was ready to make the paper clay mixture. I'll be honest, I was pretty nervous about how this would go, as I'd never worked with the medium before. I'll link helpful videos and blogs I found for the recipe, but the ingredients were toilet paper, polyfiller or gap filler, PVA glue, flour, mineral oil or baby oil, and water. I won't go into exactly what I did here because I'm pretty sure I added way too much PVA glue as my clay consistency wasn't matching the ones in the videos I was watching, and as a result my mask is quite bendy, which I confused for it not being fully dry for a while. I also made way too much of the stuff. I think I only ended up using less than a third of the bowl I was using. I have to say it was a really weird thing to sculpt with. Mine wasn't like clay at all, and more like a sticky paste, which again was probably my own fault. I primarily used a spoon and my fingers to sculpt with, and water to smooth places out. Although be careful when doing this, because you can oversaturate areas with water, and they end up taking longer to dry. I'll also say that you want the paper clay to be as thin as possible, because if it's even a centimetre thick, it'll take an extra day or up to 3 to dry. I learned this the hard way. I thought it would be a good idea to make the area where the ears would sit be thicker, thinking it would provide more strength. Trust me, don't do that. The amount of time spent waiting was ridiculous, and on a time limit I was so worried it wouldn't dry in time. So during the day the mask would be outside drying in the sun, and had a fan directly on it at night. I wanted this to be as efficient as possible, so I made a box to better circulate the air around the mask, which I think worked pretty well. So while I was waiting for the mask to dry for days, I decided to work on the ears. I was going to buy craft foam for these, but remembered I had some Plasterzote, which is basically just thicker craft foam, which would probably work better. After making a paper pattern I liked and cutting the foam out, I cut darts and used contact cement at the top of the ears so I was able to fold the edges flat. I was torn between having wire in the ears or not, so initially I chose without, which ended up being a mistake. I made one ear with wire and one without to see which I would like more, and the wired one was preferred since it could hold a better shape and could be posed. So after cutting open the seam on the second ear, I reapplied contact cement and tucked the wire inside and closed it up again. Next I brought out my Dremel to make the folded edges seamless and to add a bit of texture. After this they were heat sealed with a heat gun and posed how I liked them. It was at this point I once again was waiting around for the mask to dry, so the next best thing to do would be to decide the ears pose on the head and Photoshop a design. A lot of these poses I thought looked a bit weird or unnatural, but eventually I got something I liked the look of. Taking the picture to Photoshop, I came up with this design, which I pretty much stuck to completely. The next day came. I couldn't afford to wait any longer for the mask to dry, so I decided to remove all of the armature from the inside of the mask, hoping it would help the inside dry faster. This was kind of scary because it was still soft and a little wet where the air hadn't gotten to it, so I took my time removing the cardboard. While the mask continued to dry some more, I went ahead and added an extra layer of foam to the bottom part of each ear to help accommodate wooden dowels for structural stability. These dowels were then glued in with epoxy resin. Once that was dry, I gave each ear several coats of white primer. Unfortunately, this primer wasn't the right type of foam, but it was the best I had available, so I had to make do. The ears were hung up to dry between coats and overnight. The next day I drilled holes through the mask with my Dremel for the dowels to slot into, and then glued the ears onto the mask with more epoxy. I had to hold them on pretty tight for quite a while for them to be set enough for me to let go. After that, the dowels on the inside of the mask were trimmed and covered over with hot glue. I didn't get any pictures of this, but I also covered over any thin spots on the inside with hot glue too, both for strength and to stop it being as bendy. Hot glue was also applied to the base of the ears for strength and to make the transition from mask to ear more seamless. The mask itself got one coat of primer, which thankfully was just enough before the can ran out. Now time for airbrushing. There weren't many colours used here. I laid on the pinks in the nose and mouth with one coat, and the ears and eyes got a couple of coats. I ended up putting too much pink around the eyes, so went back in with a white to fix it. The black ooze of the eyes and ears were hand painted and were a little tricky to get to look smooth because of the bumpy texture of the mask, but I think it turned out alright. The pentagram I was putting off right to the end because I found it to be quite intimidating. I described it to a friend as being like Bob Ross's bravery tests. I almost didn't do it, but decided to give it a shot regardless, since it would have been the only thing missing from my concept art. I cut a piece of masking tape into 5 equal strips and arranged them onto the forehead. I wanted it to look like those neon pink signs you see around places, so I mixed up a separate pink colour and airbrushed lightly over the strips of tape. After letting it dry, I peeled off the tape, which is always satisfying. The next day was the camping trip, so I was up early to add elastic to the back and a couple bits of padding to the inside for comfort, and the mask was as good as done. Hope you found that somewhat informative, guys, but if nothing else, I hope it's inspired you to make something yourself. I'd love to see what you make if you do. But that's it, guys. Thanks for watching.